the recording because, see, what I want now from all of you is to uh, keep a track of all the classes and start making your own notes from now onwards, right? So, we're talking about consumer psychology, and whatever I am going to share with you today is majorly from the book by Catherine V. Jansen Boyd. She has written a book called Consumer Psychology, and my today's lesson is primarily based on her learnings and teachings that she has shared with all of us, right? Okay, so is the screen visible to you? मुझे लग रहा है कि आप लोगों को स्क्रीन नहीं दिख रही है. Is it visible to all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. We can see the screen.
Perfect. So let's begin. So let's begin with consumer psychology and what it is and how it emerged. So consumer psychology is now more than ever is highly applicable to the world in which you, me, we all are living in. Consumption of new products, branded products. This process has indoctrinated us in our culture, and it has become a very, very integral part of our society in which we all live in. So, consequently, from a business and people's point of view, it is important that psychologists have a clear understanding of how it affects human behavior. So, what is consumer psychology? And how are individuals influenced by consumption? And when did scientists start researching about consumer psychological questions? And who are the researchers who created the underpinning for consumer psychology as we know it today? So all these are the points which we are going to discuss in today's class and in our some of our next upcoming classes. So, what is consumer psychology? Consumer psychology is about understanding why and how individuals and groups engage in consumer activities, as well as how they are affected by them. A larger part of this discipline is focused on cognitive processes and behavior involved when people purchase and use products and services without knowing how people process information and how they subsequently act. It would be difficult to explain consumer psychology, right? So this is what is present in front of you. So what have you understand by the lines which are in which you can read on your screen? What can you understand from that? Anyone? So, in short, consumer psychology is just an understanding why and how we as an individuals and groups we engage in any kind of buying or selling process. How we engage into that, and what are the what are the thoughts which go behind it. So, consumer psychology is an interdisciplinary subject area and it combines theories and research methods from psychology, marketing, advertising, economics, sociology, and anthropology. So there are many areas of specialization, and throughout the years, they have been rapidly growing. So some of the more commonly researched area include include how customers make the decision, so decision making of consumers, how consumers judge a product, their judgment on a particular product, their perception, their attention, their information processing, motivational determinants of consumer behavior, their attitudes, their and what kind of influence advertisements do on consumer responses. So these are the areas on which several researches have been done. The aforementioned areas are most commonly linked to how marketers, manufacturers, and advertisers can attempt to influence consumer decisions in purchase of a particular brand or a product or a service or an idea. So, however, there are there are also areas of consumer research that are not necessary, like impact of consumption on children, right? That is not necessary for us to make a product. The impact of a particular product on children will not influence a marketer because it, as long as the product is selling. So, in learning about consumer psychology, it is important to establish a broad understanding of why consumers behave and think the way they do. And the more you know, the easier it is to explain the behavior of consumers. See, many people think that they believe that consumption is just a common sense and that you do not need any scientific methods to prove what they are already know. But I don't agree with it. What individuals think they know is often incorrect. At other times, scientific studies are also very useful in that they can be used to explain concepts that consumers are unable to express in their words, such as how particular point of purchase display affected them when shopping in a supermarket, or whether or not they are influenced by television commercials. They are unable to, as a consumer, I'll not be able to understand or evaluate that I have been influenced by the television commercial, therefore I'm buying this product. But the reality is something else for which we need to go into a scientific research. And it is important to remember that consumer psychology is first and foremost a scientific discipline and consequently should always be treated as one. It is way beyond the common sense. And when conducting a research, consumer psychologists, just like any other psychologist, make use of wide range of research methods, both qualitative and quantitative, which we have discussed while making our questionnaire as well. It is beyond the scope of maybe this class where I can teach you about all the methods of research in consumer psychology, but you should be aware that there are several research methods that can be applied to the field of consumer psychology. And without a clear understanding of how researchers reach their conclusions, it can be difficult to appreciate the real value of the outcome of research studies. So, whoever is interested in making their career in consumer psychology or advertising and marketing can go in depth and maybe do another short term course or master's or some kind of more study on these methods as well. But at this point, further, we must try to understand that why we should study consumer psychology. So, in everyday life, people are repetitively exposed to different aspects of consumption. Advertising, traveling on train, grocery shopping, watching television, listening to music, surfing the internet, clothes shopping, and reading a book are all examples of things that people consume. Almost all behaviors that humans engage in are directly or indirectly linked to consumption. Even traditional holidays such as Christmas are these days mainly about consumptions. What are originally a religious holiday has mainly been overtaken by aspects of consumption, with the quintessential example of this being Santa Claus delivering presents. Basically, there is no way of escaping the fact that consumption is a part of humans' everyday lives. Hence, without studying how consumption affects individuals and groups, one can never truly say that we understand humans, right? So, the scale on which people consume makes it evident that consumption needs to be carefully studied by all those with an interest in human behavior, whether as psychologist or marketer or consumer behaviorist, anthropologist or sociologist. Therefore, we have understood that when we're talking about consumer psychology, we need to understand the behavior of people when they are going out and purchasing things. And if you are interested in making your career in this field, you need to have good understanding of the research, scientific research methods involved into it, and there is definitely a need to study it. Next, we move on to how consumption actually affect people's lives. See, a number of research studies conducted by psychologists have repetitively shown that consumption is an integral part of people's lives. For example, it has been found that consumer activities can impact upon people's identities and how individuals convey their social status through the use of certain products and services. So, other aspects of consumption that impact upon people's lives include how men and women choose to groom themselves, right? How they shave, what perfume they apply, how they apply the makeup, how they dress themselves up. So all this includes anything from wearing perfume to going under the knife to change one's physical appearances in some way. Uh, See, never before has the phrase beauty is only skin deep been more inappropriate. Nowadays, we all have seen that beauty and the way you present yourself has become all the more important, at which people like. But at the time when you really, when there's time to dress up, you dress up the way the market wants you to look like. So most people, if you ask them, tend to agree that physical beauty is superficial and that it should not be as important as person's intellectual or emotional or spiritual qualities. However, however, the consumer society we live in is pushing consumers in a different direction. The media is constantly subjecting us to image of ideal beauty, which makes people feel that they are not good, not good enough for a particular event, or yeah, this is how I can improve myself. And consequently, they spend money on both beauty products and even cosmetic surgeries. So, grooming related issues and the relationship between consumption and identities is very important part of your syllabus as well, which we will study in great detail in our next classes. But I'm just introducing you this concept here. So social and developmental scientists have also produced a lot of research demonstrating how children are affected by mainstream media. We have also discussed it in some of our previous classes. The focus of such research has often been on whether or not television violence makes children more aggressive. Uh, Even though research within this area is not black and white, there is clear evidence that children can at times become more aggressive if exposed to aggressive media images. We have discussed about it when we were discussing about media and violence. However, However, there is often not a straightforward relationship between aggressive children and television violence, even when they are affected by it. There are other, the studies show that there are other factors as well. It is not only children who are affected by the media, but also adults. People's opinions, their values, their beliefs about others are often molded by what they are actually exposed to by the media. For example, uh, there's a television commercial can affect the way people view others, and consumption of, say, pornography can affect man's attitudes towards rape. So there were the studies which talk about that. There was a paper which I read about Zillman and Bryan. It was written way back in 1984, which does talk about it. That therefore, recently, any kind of videos related to child sexual abuse or rape, even watching them has become a crime because it aggravates the desire to do that. The studies have shown that, right? In a similar way, when you watch advertisements, it increases your desire to buy something. So naturally, what we say is media exposure, and in particular advertising also influences how consumers view particular products and services, and whether or not they will purchase them. So these days the psychology of advertising is one of the more commonly researched areas of consumer psychology, and there is now a good understanding of what captures consumers' attention and how it is possible to make consumers consciously think about what they have seen in advertised product, and when it is most suitable to show the commercials on TV, what time it is suitable, uh, what season it is when such advertisements should be shown. So it has taken a considerable time for consumer psychologists to get to the stage we are at today, where we have a good understanding of how the consumer society impact upon people, how specific consumption behavior can be explained, and what cognitive processes are involved in the various stages of consumption, right? Am I making sense to all of you? Are you there with me? Yeah? Am I making some sense?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Okay, good. So, okay, so in parallel with the constantly growing consumer society, researchers increasingly try to apply scientific evidence to various aspects of consumption. So, in order to appreciate how we reached where we are today, it is useful to have some background knowledge of early research contributions, which I will try to familiarize you all to have a good understanding of that. So, what now I will discuss with you very quickly is how the science of consumer psychology grew in parallel to the consumer society, right? So, it does have some historical aspects to it. So, let me share it with you. It's no- just know it from a story point of view, and if need be, you can add it in your answers as well. So I'm telling you a parallel story that how consumer psychology grew and how consumer society was growing. So according to historians, the the culture of consumption in Europe started before the Industrial Revolution. You all know what is Industrial Revolution, when industry started forming, and it really changed the way we all are living in this world today. because before industrial revolution, the the production was less. The production was less, therefore, there was no need for a greater market. Within the factory, you can produce 100 cups, which you might not be able to make when there was no factory, when you were making it manually. So the number of productions were less. So if the number of productions were less, you only needed less number of consumers to buy the product. But the moment the number of production increases, you have so many cups with you, now you want to sell them. And you do not have as many people or buyers with you there. You want to expand your horizon. So there the Industrial Revolution changed the whole concept. This was notable in a variety of countries, and it also created the social classes, right? Social classes such as the Dutch peasants, and in urban and rural English settings between the mid 17th century and throughout the 18th century, an increase in consumption was significant, even though it was not necessarily applicable to all the individuals throughout the Europe. However, this was to change with the Industrial Revolution, as it meant that people from all walks of life in different countries started consuming much more than they previously had. So, with the increasing number of consumption, the desire also increases. So, keep all these things in mind, and I'm taking you back to the era of 1800s. The Industrial Revolution spread throughout Europe and USA, and fundamental changes occurred in transportation, manufacturing of metals, textiles, agriculture, as well as in the social structure. How in social structure? What do I mean by social structure? This meant that there was an increase in food supplies and raw material, and the new and more efficient technology that emerged made it possible to increase the overall production levels of many products. And at a social level, there were people who were producing these products, and there were people who were consuming these products, right? So the world got divided into two parts. And those who were producing the products and were selling it to people, they were becoming richer and richer, right? And the, and then it also divided the society into two parts, as in the factory owners and the proletariats. Proletariats are the workers who are working in these factories. So uh, it 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 created the class divide as well, right? The one who is the owner and the other who is a worker. So you understood the social divide also. The Industrial Revolution created the social divide as well. So in parallel with the continuous consumption growth, many scientists realized that it is important to understand how the consumer society affects individuals in order to truly understand human behaviors. Whether they sought to understand the impact of consumption for social, economic, or humanistic reasons, they have all contributed directly or indirectly to the discipline now referred to as consumer psychology. So, consumer psychology as a field in its own right may be relatively new, the terminology and everything may be new, but the application of psychology of consumer related issues has been going on for a lot longer than many realize. Because it is an interdisciplinary area, there are n number of scientists from different fields who were studying similar kind of studies such related to consumption, matter, related to consumption and consumer related matters. But it is impossible to mention them all. But they all were, in one way or the other, were contributing to the concept of consumer psychology. So now I'm taking you to 1840s to 1920s, the era between 1840s to 1920s. So this is the era with the rise of advertising and experimental psychology, right? So after the Industrial Revolution in Europe, during the uh, mid to late 18th century, it was inevitable that all consumer-related industries would grow and change rapidly. And with the increase in production, competition was also increasing between the manufacturers. And because the competition was increasing, the pressure was on to promote the available products. जिसकी marketing अच्छी, जिसका advertisement अच्छा, उसका product ज़्यादा बिकेगा. So consequently, during the 1840s, a man called Volney Palmer, Volneypalmer, Volney Palmer opened the first advertising agency in the world, and it offered limited services and did not exactly resemble what we actually understand about the advertising agencies of today, but their main duties appeared to be as brokers for advertising space in newspapers. This is how he started. कि आप अपना ad को newspaper में कैसे आप buy कर सकते हैं उसमें. So this is how he started. However, it was not long before the advertising agency's duties expanded, and shortly afterwards, several others were established that offered a range of advertising related services to them. So, with a wider range of products now more easily available, it was also thought that shopping could be made more convenient for the customer. You need to make it easier, then only your product will have a better sale. So even though there had been a number of smaller shops selling different types of products, the range on offer tended to rather limited. They had, if they were selling a toothpaste, so one or they could have one or two things, but now they wanted a bigger range because the market was increasing, the competition was increasing. So instead, it was thought that bigger shops where most kind of things could be bought would simplify the shopping experience for consumers. तो परचूने की दुकान में नहीं मिल रहा है चीजें सारी, तब हमें बड़े शॉप्स की जरूरत है जहां हम सारे प्रोडक्ट्स को दिखा सकें. So somewhere in 1982, sorry, 1852. So in 1852, the world's first department store, Lee Bon Marche, opened in Paris. It was one of the first places to announce that haggling was no longer allowed and also had a money back guarantee. Soon, other followed, like the ones in New York's, Mackay's in New York's in 1978 or somewhere around that, and the world rapidly became accustomed to larger stores with bigger product selections. You are aware of such kind of markets, are you not? You have seen such kind of markets. Are you with me? Are all of you with me? Yes or no? वो भी सुन रहे हो? Yes or no? Hello?
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am.
All right. So what did I mention? I talked about the first advertising agency. I talked about the first department store we started in Paris, and then things started moving ahead. It was also during this period that the world's first experimental psychology laboratory was established. And which year we are talking about? We're talking about late 19th century. It was set up in Leipzig. It is a place in Germany. In 1879 by a German psychologist named Wilhelm Wundt, Wundt, Wundt. He's often referred to as the father of experimental psychology, right? Experimental psychology. So he was one of the founders of the first major school of thoughts in psychology, which is known as structuralism. What is structuralism? Structuralism focused on understanding the structure of the mind and would believe that psychologists should focus on immediate consequence experience. And throughout his career, he investigated many different areas of psychology. But attention may be the most relevant areas of consumer psychology. So Wundt also viewed attention as the part of perception that reflects what humans are consciously aware of. He also had lot of students, some of whom, such as very known psychologists like James Cattell, and they all became very known psychologists later on. So these are different things. But what are the important things he looked at about the attention, because in marketing your attention is very important. So in late 1800s, scientists started to realize that that material possessions play an important role in people's life. Material possession is important in people's life, and this is evident from William James' writing in 1890. He wrote when he proclaimed uh, that possessions contribute to the understanding of who you are. Possessions contribute to understanding of who you are. So he wrote a book uh, called The Principles of Psychology, and he had written a quote, which I do have it here with me. So he said in this thing, he said that in its widest possible sense, a man's self is the sum total of all that he can call not only his body and his psychic powers, but his clothes, his house, his wife and children, his ancestors and friends, his reputation and works. If they wax and prosper, he feels triumphant. If they dwindle and die away, he feels cast down. I will write it and give it to you. And I would like you to read this and try to explain what he wants to say. And James, he was an academic at Harvard University, and he was originally trained in philosophy. He was one of the early pragmatists who theorized about consciousness, and in particular focusing on how it enables people to adjust to their environment. So it was such a train of thought that also became the foundation of industrial psychology, which studies people at work. I want to talk to you about advertising and other things as well, but I think it will be too much for you to digest for today. And then I also have want to share about the Coca-Cola and how it was taken to court and other advertising researches. But maybe I'll do it in our next class. So now coming to you, what all you have understood in today's class. Let me stop recording and then we can discuss.